This is why we are family. Because we have people to rely on, rest on. Good morning, church.
Good morning.
It is really, really good to be here. As it is every time I get a chance to visit 6-8. Particularly good to have what I consider to be the honor and the great privilege to be able to share with you this morning. Some of you may know that your pastor and I, Reverend Sens, go back in United Church of Christ work. For about 7.5 years, I had the honor to serve as Minister for Youth and Young Adult Empowerment in the national offices in Cleveland. It was part of a group called Justice and Witness Ministries, and so in this capacity, I got a really fun job of hanging out with young people and working with young leadership and helping to develop young leadership. And there was a young adult here by the name of Amy Sens who everybody knew from early on, had not only the extreme intelligence and sharp wit, but really the spirit of challenge and the spirit of doing things a little bit differently and outside the box to make a great leader. And the rest of the story you know as well as I do. She is indeed manifesting her leadership, and you are partnering with her in that leadership. And so moving back to Maryland earlier this year, it was my great joy to reconnect with her and to see moves that she's making, the moves that you all are making as a family. And I think that we will maybe try to touch base on a few things that hopefully will help inform your walk as a family here today. And really, I say you all, but I've been up here enough so that I feel like I'm kind of that adjunct member of the family. I may drop in here and there. You may not see me, but believe me, I'm around because I really enjoy the spirit of what's here and what you all are doing. Reverend Sens informed me earlier in the week as we were going over the logistics of the day. She said to me, now I try to keep my sermons at about 15 minutes. Bless her heart. That was a very kind way. She's a sweet person, and she's a sweetheart, as you know. That was a very kind way of saying, Ken, don't get happy up there. And unfortunately, what I did not tell her, which she probably already knows, is that telling a black preacher to keep his sword short is like telling the sun to rise in the west. But I tell you what, I will not keep you. I promise I'm not going to keep you too long today. But I would ask that you kind of think with me on a few minutes, just for a few minutes, on the topic of now is the time. Now is the time. Creator God, we are here today. Open our hearts, our minds, and our souls to your word. Have us pay attention to what you're trying to tell us. In your name. Amen.
Amen.
So Paul's relationship with the church at Corinth, from whence our text comes today, wasn't always easy, to make an understatement. He'd established that church, but as it often goes with projects you start, or certainly with children you birth, there were ups and downs and arguments, offenses, and more. Written probably in about the mid-50s in what we call the Common Era, Paul comes to a point where he wants to remind the Corinthians not only to realize the importance of the gift of God's grace, but also to act on it. He declares the time of salvation to be present and offers up himself and his colleagues as examples of what those who accept that grace and salvation will go through. Yet, as we look at what this passage might hold for us today, I'm interested in looking at this salvation thing in the light of doing justice. Let's put a little different twist on it today, shall we? Let's look at it in the context of being people who love mercy and walk with God. In other words, in the light of the verse from the prophet Micah, from whence your name, 6:8, comes. In urging the appreciation of God's grace, Paul quotes the prophet Isaiah and then emphasizes that now is the time. Today, fam, I also want to say to you that now is the time. Right here, right now in Maryland, in this country, in this world. Now is the time for justice, for action, for transformation of ourselves and indeed our surrounding society. Now, fortunately, as we look back over history, including recent times, there are various examples of this that we can draw strength from. Examples of folk realizing the urgency of the moment. Look at the civil rights movement. If we go back only a few decades to something that is usually thought of in terms of the 50s and 60s, but really has a far longer history. That is a matter of people seizing the moment. realizing now is the time. That is a moment where they could not wait any longer. As I talk to family members and elders in my life who were a part of that, I always get the sense that it was do or die, that they couldn't put it off any longer, that the moves they make, that the demonstrations held, that all of the extensive organizing that was done very often in the church basement, all right? We need to claim our heritage as people of faith very often in the church basement or in other houses of worship. There was an urgency about it that told them that now is the time. And indeed, if you recall the masterpiece that was Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail, if you've never read that, I urge you before you go to bed tonight, if you can get a hold of it, if you can look it up online, go to the library this week. If you've never read it, you really have to read it because it is a masterpiece that we need to learn from. But in that letter, he was speaking to Christians, who else to cause trouble, who were upset at the quote-unquote pace of the movement and upset that he was making all these moves and wanted him to just slow down a little bit, take it easy. He realized that now is the time, and in that letter, he said, no, it's not time for what has now come to be called gradualism. Check this out. I think this is beautiful how he put it. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I've heard the word wait. It rings in the air of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurors that justice too long delayed is justice denied. You see, Martin knew that now, not later, is the time. Let's come more recently. Let's come to within the past year of our lives in this country and around the world for something called the Occupy movement. A fascinating thing, which really was just started by a couple of emails, where somebody, I believe in Canada, put out the suggestion, hey, you know what you all ought to do down there in the States is go occupy Wall Street sometime. And it was an email. And that grew like wildfire. And all of a sudden, before you knew it, you had hundreds of people who were sick and tired, who were fed up of the greed, of the oppression, of the lies, of the twisting of principles and morals, so that you had an honest-to-goodness movement, unlike which I could have imagined even a year ago or 2 years ago, unlike which this country has seen in a long time, fueled by other brothers and sisters from various faiths around the world, especially our Islamic brothers and sisters, who showed us in what's now called the Arab Spring last year how things are really done. See, they started occupying squares and streets over there. They might get beaten, imprisoned, shot, tortured, and raped. All right, they put it all on the line. Sometimes we get a little lax over here, but at least there are a few of us in this country who decided to put it on the line, not only in Manhattan, but in Baltimore and cities around the country, and therefore, again, in cities around the world. And this type of Occupy movement was a matter of people saying, you know what, they've told us to wait, and we did that, and nothing happened, and it didn't work. And for whatever their particular faith tradition or non-tradition was, they welled up within themselves the spirit to say, now is the time, we're marching now, we're occupying now. One of the most fascinating movements I've ever seen. Now, I should pause right there and confess that I just came back from living in Connecticut for 3 years. I moved back down here to my grandparents' old house, but for 3 years I was in New Haven, which is only about an hour from New York City. And I always meant to get down to Wall Street, meant to see it, meant to take part in some of the activities. You know, for my bio in the bulletin that I'm a poet, I meant to go ahead and link with other poets that were down there, and always meant to get around it. And I confess that by the time I moved back here, or moreover, by the time the police had broken the whole thing up and trashed everything, that I had not gotten down there. Which reminds me that sometimes the moment is now and not tomorrow when I think I'm going to get around it. When we think we're going to put things off too. We have to actually seize the opportunity, seize the moment. I won't be able to tell his generation or his children's generation that I actually got to Wall Street, and that pains me. However, even if we miss the moment, we can still live the lesson, learn the lesson, and create our own moments, particularly from that movement. There are many more that we don't have time this morning to talk about. but that teach the importance of seizing the time, of realizing that the Creator makes now the acceptable moment, despite what others may think. But what happens when we do? What happens when we actually claim this and live this and embrace this? What can we expect when we act, when we speak a word for the God of justice? Paul's description of his situation might give us a lens with which to look at our own, even to look at the life of a new congregation in Central Baltimore. The passage goes into what we go through by and with what we make it through, and then again in what we must stand strong through, and what we must endure. He talks about what we go through. He says, through great endurance, in afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger. That's an arduous list. That's this type of thing. That's something you don't even want to read. You don't want to let your kids hear it, because it's all too scary, it's all too real, and yet it's true. Because that is not only what folks throughout our history, throughout our faith history, throughout our various geographic histories have gone through, but as we learned again from Manhattan a few months ago, with people getting beat on the bridge, with people getting maced and dragged out, that's what people still go through now. Think back to, not only that example, think back to the civil rights movement. We don't have to rehearse the history of what happened there. We know its pain. Okay? Think about the hell the LGBT families endured for daring to commend itself and claim itself as servants of the living God, servants and children of the Most High God. Those who have done justice, who have committed themselves to the path of peace and anti-oppression, have suffered all of these things, have they not? I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, of course. However, reminding ourselves of the cost of discipleship, as German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was martyred by the Nazis, wrote of. Reminding of this reminds us not only of the seriousness of the matter, but also sets us up for claiming the ensuing gifts of grace that help us make it through. As you move through the day in week 6-8, I want to challenge you to do this. Think about what you've been through, personally, as a family, as a community, however you define that in your various lives and in the various worlds in which you travel. Think of what you've been through sometimes and when you've done the right thing. Sometimes the backlash might not be so dramatic or obvious. It might be a bit more subtle, right? Yet still painful, still difficult to deal with. How did it end up? These are real questions I'm asking you. I think about this as you move through the day. Ask yourself, how did it end up? Maybe the end isn't in sight yet. Maybe it's still going on in your life right now. What might you do with it? What grace do you claim to do something with it? Then think collectively as a congregation, what might 6-8 have to go through as it stands for justice in Baltimore and beyond? That's the through. Paul goes on and he starts talking about by and with. Look at all of these gifts that are listed. He talks about the purity of your purpose. He talks about the knowledge, this knowledge that you share with each other even now, even as we've done today, even as you do every time I come here. The patience and the kindness that you show each other, that you've shown me every time I've had the opportunity to visit. The love and the truth which will be necessary with each other as you continue to grow and forge your ministry. I should say that again, the love and the patience and the truth that you will have to have with each other as you continue to grow, as you forge your ministry. That's with most congregations. I understand that this is the perfect congregation and you all have no problems like that. But for the rest of us out there in the real world, we need a whole lot of patience and love with each other for reasons I can't even get into. I could tell you a story. I could tell you a story. You need that even as you forge your ministry as a congregation. Let's not accept these gifts of grace in vain, because they will come in very, very handy. Second question for you during the week. What skill or set of skills, what abilities, what wells of strength do you tap into to make it through? What wells of collective strength, what weapons of righteousness do you as a family of faith, as a 6-8 congregation have that will shore you up for what you have to do? I want you to really think about this, because you're at a stage of growth now where you come together, the excitement is on, and as you begin to press out and do things, when the rubber meets the road, you're going to hit some resistance. Anybody trying to do the right thing is going to. And if you're the new kid on the block trying to do the right thing, you're going to have other people saying, go away, you bother me. Don't let them do that. What wells of strength, what collective skill sets and abilities will allow you to keep pushing on as a 6-8 congregation? Then Paul talks about in. He uses language such as we are. And there will be those times when, as he mentioned, you'll slander. There will be those times when you're mocked. There will be those times when you're laughed at. There will be those times when you're lied about, lied to, lied on. Believe me, I know. Yes, even from people in this wider thing that is supposed to be God's church. Again, I can tell you gruesome stories about the lies told from people within one's own faith structure, one's own faith family, from one's own faith team. This will happen. Paul said it back then, it's true now. There will be those times, 6-8, when you're treated as outsiders, when you're ignored, looked over, brushed off, brushed aside, when people will anticipate and even look forward to your dying as a congregation. And when things get really deep, as we know from the history that we've just talked about, there may be times when folk look forward to your dying. Period. What is it that is going to give you the strength? Where do you tap into? Okay, to move through. What is it? What is the grace and the ability and the gifts of God that allow you to stand and say, no, we are. Even in the midst of those things, we are, we still are, and we will continue to be. In these moments, stay strong in that knowledge. Whatever those things that are that you identify, stay strong in them. Hold on to them. Stay strong in the knowledge of who you are and to your mission. What people have thought about you, have said about you, you're going to overcome that. You are overcoming that. Count those victories, 6-8. Count those victories and think about what you will be saying about yourselves in 5 years. How you will be able to say, my soul looks back at how it got over. As an individual, as a family of faith. You see, right now is the time, 6-8, right this very moment. Recognize the incredible opportunity that you have as a dynamic new family of faith to impact the lives of each other and of those around you. Heed your God-given call as manifested in your very name. And show the city and beyond what it is to live out the doing of justice and the loving of mercy. Show them what it is to walk humbly with the divine. Execute the responsibility you have to work in solidarity with the oppressed and with all who seek to make this on earth as it is in heaven. Discern what needs to be corrected, what needs to be righted, and do so. Go and correct it. Go and right it. Believe that you have the power to do so. Do so with the authority of the just God who sends you. I want to end today by telling you of a group of folk in South Florida that I've been privileged to be allied with for some years now. A group of people who are truly forgotten by the majority of society, but who truly demonstrate the faith to seize the moment, who understand that now is the time. Way down in the southern part of Florida, not too far from Fort Myers, is a small place called Immokalee. And in this place are grown most of the, especially during the winter half of the year, most of the tomatoes that supply the East Coast through various suppliers, whether it be restaurant chains, whether it be supermarkets, so forth and so on. And if you know anything about farm labor, some of you might be familiar from your own families with farm labor, but mass farm labor in this country, the way it's done now, involves a group of people who are on the bottom of the ladder. Those are the ones that are actually out in the hot sun. Those are the ones that are bending over and picking it. Above them, there's a middle level, a middle group. They're called the growers. Those are the ones that directly handle the pay for the farm workers. Those are the ones that have the direct and immediate communication. And over them are the companies that we come into contact with. The McDonald's, the Burger King, the Taco Bell, Giant Foods, Subway, Aramark, or Sodexo when we're on campus and that type of thing. And in the 90s, this group of people, the tomato pickers on the bottom of that ladder, said now's the time. Said there will be no more gradual waiting. There will be no more saying, well, maybe it'll happen later, maybe it'll happen later. They realized that it was time to seize the moment, and they began to organize and they began to pressure not only the growers, but the higher level companies. Because they knew that unless the major companies are called to the carpet, unless they act right, then they will never receive the wages or the improvement of conditions which they need to. I don't have time to tell you about the ugliness of the conditions. I don't have time to tell you about the physical abuse that goes on. Their story is fascinating. If you go online to their website, which is ciw-online.org, ciw-online.org, and I can write that down for you later. Their story is absolutely an example of people who, by all rights, have nothing. They don't have a big cash backing. They don't have the resources that we have. They don't have degrees and degrees of education. There's so many things that theoretically they don't have, but they have the spirit that God gave them to say, now is the time that we are going to do justice, and we are going to demonstrate our divinity right now by organizing. And they did just that. And in what was one of the most amazing victories in the history of labor in this country, they were able to bring Taco Bell to the table after a long boycott. And with allies, including the United Church of Christ, including other faith groups, celebrities, and so forth, they were able to move Taco Bell to sign off on an agreement. And when that happened, they revved it up on the McDonald's. And a day before the boycott against McDonald's was going to start, I was in Illinois at the time. We were getting ready to march on the headquarters. McDonald's signed off. Burger King signed off. Eventually Subway. Most recently, Trader Joe's. This is the type of power that can happen. There are those who are holding out, including Giant, or more specifically Ahold, which is the Dutch company that owns Giant. All right, there are a few that are trying to hold out, but they've begun to see some of the improvements because they said now is the time, and we are going to seize the moment. I'm a poet, so I'd be remiss if I didn't leave you with a poem to close. This is something that I did for them at a rally in Florida a few years ago. As I bite into a delicious jubilee, I'm forced to wonder if the person who picked it is even free. You see, I grew up with the noble images of those who collected the fruit of the earth and idyllic scenes perfected by a peaceful farming life. No oppression, no strife. At least, that's what they told us. Brainwashed us with some wholesome images, a bill of goods they sold us because the goods they sell us often come to us through a pain they don't tell us about. So when the workers cry out, we react with doubt, finding it hard to believe that what we buy from our supermarkets isn't always retrieved with the due respect we thought all farm workers received. But for real, this ain't Green Acres or hee-haw, y'all. This ain't the Little House on the Prairie or even Smallville. No, this is how most of our food arrives to our plate, through this country's traditional estate of labor exploitation, cultivated in hate. A Steinbeck scene put into current context. I never could have guessed what would be next. Human beings being stressed by oppressors, stomped like grapes of wrath, run through presses, weighted down by pails of 30-plus pounds, long, back-breaking days, and incessant rounds of picking those green, red-orange delectables that we find so acceptable to be on our plates. Bountiful, the corporation not accountable. Statue says, give me your masses yearning to be free. Seems to be a lie to me, because if you don't look like one of the dominant culture but have a humor like some of you and me, you might be yearning for a freedom you can't see. Free trade agreements give the poor the freedom of starvation, or sending a loved one off to a plantation to be welcomed with greetings of locks and chains, pistol whippings and beatings, workers putting their lives at stake for a beefsteak. The bosses know what they're doing. It ain't no mistake. They're more interested in the quantity of their better boys and big girls than in the quality of conditions which would allow workers' children to be better boys, or grow up to be big girls. You say tomato, I say tomato. Corporations say the same old bullish bravado, creating a mix of publicity and tricks with which to confuse the public's wits, concealing the public's knowledge of the batterings and the sticks. Making a profit off the public's ignorance is how they get their kicks. Tricking the public into hopping on over to where shopping is a pleasure. As long as you don't measure the blood, sweat, and tears harvested in this treasure which supports executive leisure. However, the workers. Now collectively the workers grow strong, like a fine wine. And so we ally with them, follow their leadership, knowing that over time justice will prevail in the fields and human rights will be deemed more important than what a crop yields. Their spirit is strong, and even in the midst of tears they sing freedom songs, so with them we continue the struggle Though the road may be long, integrity is ours, and to us the victory will belong. So, cultivate, muévete fuerte a por cultivate, muévete fuerte a por trabajadores, que la fuerza de la tierra es suya. Trabajadores, que la fuerza de la tierra es suya. Farm workers, may the strength of the earth be yours. Farm workers, may the strength of the earth be yours. Coalition, may the strength of the earth be yours. God bless you, sister.